Zarthan's massive form shifted in his throne, the clicking of his mandibles breaking the stillness of the room. His eyes narrowed further, an unsettling glow now flickering in their depths. He had faced entire armies, wiped out species with ease, and never once had he been met with such a response. Humans, for all their so-called strength, were supposed to fear, supposed to break under the pressure of his power. But this one, this human before him, stood unmoving, unafraid. Bold words, Zarthan rumbled, leaning forward, his sheer presence enough to shake the chamber's foundations. His long, clawed hands gripped the edges of his throne. But words will not save you. You cannot fight what you cannot defeat. Kane's expression remained unwavering. I didn't come here to win. I came here to make sure you know we're not just some prey you can pick off without consequence. He was bruised, battered, his body a roadmap of the battle he'd fought. But in his eyes burned something much fiercer than pain or fear, resilience. Zarthan took a step closer, his immense shadow engulfing Kane. The air grew colder, heavy with the threat of violence. He towered over the human, inspecting him as though he were nothing more than a curiosity. Tell me, human. Zarthan's voice dripped with malice. What drives you? What makes you so defiant when everything around you crumbles? The warlord gestured toward the walls of the chamber, which were lined with the remains of defeated species, their insignias and weapons displayed as trophies. Do you think you will escape the same fate? His words were laced with venom, but there was an odd sense of uncertainty in his tone, as though he were testing a theory. Kane stood tall, his chest heaving as he spoke. We don't need to escape it. We embrace it, he replied, his voice growing stronger, fiercer. Every loss, every death, those are just reasons to fight harder, not to surrender. For a brief moment, Zarthan's expression faltered. He had expected fear, fear that would cloud the human's mind and render him vulnerable. But this soldier's mind was unclouded. He had expected weakness, but found only an unyielding will. The warlord was silent, and the two of them stood there, locked in a standoff, the weight of centuries of conflict pressing down on them. Zarthan knew he could destroy Kane. He had obliterated entire worlds in an instant. The Zalvok were built for conquest, for domination. But there was something other about this human, something intangible, yet undeniable. Kane didn't back down, his voice steady and calm, as though he were speaking to a fellow soldier rather than an alien warlord. You think we're weak because you've never fought against us before. You've only fought against our bodies, against our technology. But you've never fought against our spirit. The alien's eyes flared with a mix of anger and curiosity. Your spirit. You speak of defiance like it's some kind of weapon. Kane's lips curled into a grim smile. It is. Zarthan's mandibles clicked in frustration. This was unlike anything he had encountered. The humans should be broken. They should fear the inevitable, surrender to the might of his empire. Instead, here stood a single human, staring him down, unflinching. The warlord paused, his gaze flicking over the human's battered form once more. There was something about this man, about humanity, that shook him to his core. Something about their refusal to yield, no matter the odds, unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Why aren't you afraid, human? Zarthan asked again, his voice softer now, the challenge laced with genuine curiosity. Kane's response was simple, but it rang through the room with the weight of centuries of human history. Because you can kill me, but you'll never break me. We're humans. We never stop fighting. For the first time, Zarthan's eyes flashed with something other than rage. There was a flicker of doubt, just a momentary crack in the alien's unshakable confidence. And in that moment, Kane knew that the warlord hadn't just underestimated humanity, he had underestimated him. The silence that followed was deafening. Kane's words hung in the air, and for the first time in the entire exchange, it was Zarthan who looked away. He hadn't expected this. No one ever did. Zarthan turned sharply, his voice now cold, as if shutting down the moment of vulnerability. "You may survive this encounter, human, but your kind will still fall." Kane met his eyes once more. "Maybe, but we won't fall without making sure you remember us." And with that, the alien warlord, for the first time, hesitated. The questions lingered. The seed of doubt had been planted. Something about the human's words struck at the heart of the Zalvok's perceived superiority. He wasn't sure why, but this human, this soldier, had unsettled him in a way no other being ever had. As Zarthan's guards moved in, ready to take Kane away, the warlord said one last thing, his voice still laced with doubt. "This isn't over, human. I'll be watching." Kane didn't respond, but his eyes never left Zarthan's. The battle was far from won, but the war had just taken a turn. Kane was thrown into a dark, cramped cell, the metal door clanging shut behind him with a deafening finality. The stench of alien technology and stale air filled the small space, and his battered body ached with the weight of exhaustion. He collapsed to the cold floor, not bothering to move for several long moments. The pain was relentless, his mind spinning with the events that had led him here. But amidst the physical suffering, one thought consumed him. Survive. Survival had always been his driving force. From the first day he had picked up a weapon, to the brutal training that turned him into the soldier he was today, everything had been about enduring, no matter the cost. His mind drifted back to the early days, to the chaos that had unfolded when the Zalvok first arrived. Earth had been a peaceful planet, teeming with people who were unprepared for the violent storm that descended upon them. The first wave of the Zalvok had come without warning. Massive warships darkening the skies, their relentless assault annihilating entire cities in seconds. The sheer power of their invasion had thrown humanity into disarray. Kane had been a rookie back then, no more than a terrified young man when the first explosions shattered his home. His family, his parents, his younger sister, had been among the many who didn't make it out. The air was thick with smoke, screams echoing from every corner of the city. But Kane had survived. He remembered the day he had made the decision to never allow himself to be weak. His sister's face, wide-eyed and pleading, blood dripping from a wound in her leg, had haunted him for weeks. She had begged him to leave, to escape, to survive. But when the Zalvok's ships descended on the city, he realized there was nowhere to run. So he fought. He had dragged his sister to safety, fought off aliens twice his size, and done whatever it took to keep her alive, until the very moment she had breathed her last. That day, he swore to never again be caught unprepared, never again to let his loved ones fall to those who viewed them as nothing more than insects to be crushed. And that was why he had joined the resistance, fighting not only to avenge his family, but to ensure that humanity could stand tall against their invaders. The losses had been staggering. He had seen entire cities wiped off the map, his fellow soldiers mowed down by weapons far superior to anything humanity had ever known. But each time, humanity adapted. They learned, they fought back, and with every loss, they became stronger. Kane gritted his teeth, forcing himself to sit up. He couldn't afford to let the memories drown him. Not now. Not when humanity's future depended on him. As the minutes dragged on, the door to the cell creaked open, and a Zalvok guard stepped in. The creature was clad in black armor, its 6 arms twitching restlessly as it locked eyes with Kane, its mandibles clicking in what could only be described as annoyance. The alien's yellow eyes gleamed, as though it found some twisted amusement in Kane's helplessness. "You survived the arena," the guard said in its strange, guttural language, though the translation came through loud and clear in Kane's mind. "You will die soon enough, human. No one can defeat Zarthan." Kane didn't flinch. He had heard this all before, but the guard wasn't wrong. Zarthan was powerful. His species was unstoppable, or so they thought. The Zalvok had the numbers, the technology, and the military might. But humanity had something they never expected. A relentless will to fight, to survive against all odds. Kane's voice was steady when he spoke. Zarthan may be strong, but he doesn't understand us. He doesn't understand what happens when you push humanity to the edge. The guard paused, seemingly unsure of how to respond. There was something about Kane's conviction that unsettled it. The humans had always been weak in comparison, had always been subjugated, yet here he was, unbroken, unwavering. The guard could feel the power of the human spirit, even if it couldn't comprehend it. After a long, tense moment, the guard turned and left without another word, leaving Kane alone in the darkness once more. As the door slammed shut, Kane finally allowed himself a deep breath. It was clear now. Zarthan had underestimated humanity. He hadn't counted on the fire that burned in their hearts, and that, Kane realized, was the Zalvok's greatest mistake. His hand clenched into a fist. He wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. This war was far from over, and he would do everything in his power to ensure humanity's survival. The fire inside him still burned, and for the first time since the battle began, Kane smiled grimly. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Days blurred together as Kane sat in the dark, cold cell. The alien guards came and went, their presence almost a constant reminder of the vast gulf between the invader's power and his own helplessness. The sting of his wounds still pulsed, but his mind was far sharper than it had been during his first moments of capture. He had stopped counting the hours, stopped waiting for the pain to subside. Instead, his thoughts circled back to one singular, relentless truth: survival. But survival wasn't enough anymore. It hadn't been since he had watched his sister fall, her lifeblood seeping into the dirt as the Zalvok advanced. Humanity wasn't fighting for survival alone anymore. They were fighting for revenge. They were fighting to take back what had been stolen. There had been whispers during the earlier days of his captivity, rumors that other survivors, other resistance groups, had already begun to strike back at the Zalvok Empire. Vengeful raids had taken place in hidden corners of the galaxy, guerrilla tactics that reminded the invaders that humanity was far from broken. But those small victories, those fleeting moments of triumph, had always been overshadowed by the overwhelming force of Zarthan's empire. The war was one-sided, with humanity always playing catch-up. Still, Kane knew that if humanity could just unite, if they could push back hard enough, then they might just have a chance. The problem was, most of the galaxy believed that resistance was futile. The Zalvok were too strong, too unrelenting. But Kane had seen something in the eyes of the soldiers he'd fought alongside. He'd seen it in his fellow humans, the refusal to accept extinction. It was that refusal that kept him going. It was that defiance that gave him hope. On the 5th day of his imprisonment, the door to his cell creaked open once again. But this time, it wasn't the cold, emotionless guards who entered. The figure that stepped inside was draped in dark, flowing robes, a hood obscuring their face. For a moment, Kane couldn't tell whether it was an ally or an enemy. The figure stepped forward with a grace that was at odds with the clumsy, brutal movements of the Zalvok soldiers. "You're not what I expected." The figure's voice was low and deliberate, though there was an unmistakable edge of authority to it. Kane squinted, his vision still blurry from the fatigue. "Who are you?" he rasped, the words tasting dry on his tongue. The figure lowered their hood, revealing a human face, young and determined, though streaked with dirt and exhaustion. The eyes that locked onto his were dark, but there was no mistaking the fire burning in them. This wasn't a prisoner. This was someone who had come to fight. "My name is Lieutenant Mara Ellison. I'm part of the Human Liberation Front." She looked him over, her gaze lingering on his bloodied uniform. "And you, Kane, are far more important to the cause than you think." The mention of the Human Liberation Front sent a surge of hope through Kane's chest. The group had been a rumor on the fringes of human resistance, a shadow organization dedicated to fighting back against the Zalvok in any way they could. For years, they'd been working in secret, organizing the few survivors into an effective fighting force. "You've heard of us, then?" Ellison asked, catching his look of recognition. Kane nodded, his throat tight with emotion. I thought you were all just stories. My people. He trailed off, shaking his head. I thought they were all gone. Ellison stepped closer, her eyes softened with understanding. We've all lost something to them, Kane. But we're still here, still fighting. And you're going to help us. She paused for a moment, her eyes sharp, focused. Zarthan may be powerful, but he's also overconfident. The Zalvuk may have strength, but they underestimate us. They think we're nothing but insects, disposable. But we've learned, and we've got something they don't. Resilience. Kane's breath caught in his throat. She was right. He could feel it in his bones. Despite everything, despite the overwhelming odds, humanity was still alive, still fighting. But what can we do? Kane asked, the doubt creeping in. We've been outclassed at every turn. You saw the fleet, the weapons they have. Ellison's smile was grim but full of conviction. We're not going to beat them head-on, Kane. We're going to hit them where it hurts, and we're going to use the one thing they can't defend against. And what's that? Kane asked, his voice full of skepticism. Us, Ellison said, her gaze unwavering. Humanity has survived against every obstacle it has faced, because we're not just fighters. We're survivors. We can adapt, outthink, and outlast our enemies. And that's exactly what we're going to do to the Zalvuk. The words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time in days, Kane felt something stir in his chest, something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Ellison turned and motioned for Kane to follow. There's a way out of here, but we need you to come with us. You'll lead the charge. Together, we'll make sure humanity isn't just remembered. We'll make sure humanity wins. Without a word, Kane stood. His body screamed in protest, but the fire inside him burned brighter than any pain he had ever felt. He followed her out of the cell, the heavy clang of the door shutting behind them, a signal that this was no longer just about survival. This was about taking back the future. And the spark of rebellion had just been lit. Kane's muscles protested with every step as he followed Lieutenant Ellison down a narrow, dimly lit corridor. His mind raced, processing the shocking revelation that a group of humans, an organized resistance, still existed and was actively fighting back against the Zalvuk. The weight of his past and the horrors he'd witnessed didn't feel quite as heavy now. There was a flicker of something in him that had been missing since the day his family died. A sense of purpose, of hope. It felt foreign but welcome, like an old friend returning after years of absence. The corridor they traversed was eerily quiet, the hum of alien machinery vibrating beneath their feet. There were no guards here, and the only sound was their footfalls echoing in the long metallic hallway. They were deep within the Zalvuk worship, and every second spent on this vessel brought them closer to the heart of enemy territory. Ellison led him into a small, hidden room at the far end of the hall, its entrance concealed by an advanced holographic projector that made the walls seem solid. Inside, a group of 6 other humans stood huddled together, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a jagged scar across his face, looked up as they entered. "Is this him?" the man asked, eyeing Kane with suspicion. His voice was low and gravelly, the kind that spoke of years spent in the depths of war. Ellison nodded. "This is Captain Elias Kane. He survived Zarthan's attack and has been in the fight since the beginning. We need him." The scared man didn't seem convinced. What makes him so special? Another survivor's not going to change the tide of this war. Kane bristled at the challenge, but Ellison placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Trust me, he's different. We'll need his knowledge of Zalvuk tactics, and more importantly, his leadership." The man grunted, clearly skeptical, but unwilling to argue further. "Fine. You say so." Ellison turned to Kane. "We don't have much time. The Zalvuk have already started moving to a new position, and they'll be on alert soon. The only chance we have is to get you out of here and back to our base." Kane frowned, still processing everything. "How are we getting out?" "There's no way the ship's security will let us just walk out of here, and even if we do escape, we'll be hunted down the moment we set foot in open space." Ellison's face darkened, but her voice remained steady. "We have a plan. A risky one, but it's our best shot." She moved over to a console in the corner of the room, typing in a series of commands. The screen flickered to life, revealing a map of the Zalvok warship. "We're in the lower levels of the ship right now, surrounded by enemy forces. But there's a small access point near the main hangar bay, a blind spot in their security systems. It's a tight squeeze, but we can make it through undetected. Once we're there, we steal one of their smaller ships and make a break for it." Kane studied the map, narrowing his eyes. "It's not that simple. The Zalvok will have patrols, sentries. They'll be watching every exit." Ellison gave him a hard look. "We know. That's why we need you. You're the best we have at navigating these ships. You know their layout, their weaknesses, and you've survived the worst of their attacks." The others in the room nodded in agreement, their eyes full of silent respect for Kane. He had earned that respect on the battlefield, in the thick of countless battles where most would have fallen. "I'm not the only one here with experience," Kane replied, his voice low but resolute. "But if we're going to get out of here, we need to move fast. No hesitation." Ellison's lips curled into a tight smile. "Exactly. That's why we need you, Captain." She turned to the others. "Prepare for the escape. We move in 5 minutes." The team sprang into action, gathering their gear and checking weapons, their movements efficient and practiced. Kane felt the rush of adrenaline flooding his system as he grabbed a weapon from the nearby table. It was a standard-issue human pulse rifle, but the way it felt in his hands brought him a sense of comfort, a reminder of who he was, what he had done, and what he was willing to do to protect humanity. As the last preparations were made, Ellison walked over to Kane and handed him a small, sleek communicator. "Once we get to the hangar, we'll need you to create a diversion. Buy us time to steal a ship." Kane looked at the communicator, then met her eyes. "I'll do my part." The escape plan was set in motion, but Kane couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. This mission was dangerous, far more dangerous than anything he had done before, but there was something about it that felt right. Something about taking action, about fighting back, that made him feel alive in a way that he hadn't since his world had been shattered. As the countdown began, Kane gave Ellison a nod. "Let's get this done." And with that, they set off down the corridor, their steps steady and purposeful. The first real strike against the Zalvok had just begun. The ship hummed with life around them, but to Kane and the small team of rebels, it was a fortress of looming danger. Every corner they turned felt like a potential death trap, every movement calculated to avoid detection. The Zalvok soldiers were relentless, and their surveillance systems were nearly flawless. Yet the team moved with quiet precision, each of them well-trained for the covered operation ahead. Kane's eyes darted across the dimly lit corridors, every instinct screaming for him to stay alert. His pulse thrummed in his ears as he glanced back at the rest of the team, making sure they were still on track. Ellison led the group, her every motion calculated, eyes sharp with focus. The scared man, whom Kane had learned was named Reeve, followed close behind, his large frame seemingly out of place in the narrow halls, but no less dangerous. Kane was no stranger to covert missions, but the stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just a mission for the Resistance, it was for humanity's survival. If they failed, they'd be wiped out, just like so many others. As they rounded another corner, Ellison held up a hand, signaling for the team to halt. She gestured for Kane to join her by the wall. "There's a patrol ahead. We'll need to take them out silently." Kane nodded, understanding the weight of their situation. The Zalvok soldiers weren't exactly known for subtlety, but their numbers made up for it. One wrong move and the entire ship would be on high alert. Reeve, the largest member of their team, unslung his rifle and checked the safety, nodding at Ellison. He had the heavy-duty weaponry, while Kane carried a more versatile, lighter rifle, more suited for stealth, but no less deadly in close combat. "I'll take the far side," Reeve said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "You two cover me." Ellison nodded, her face a mask of concentration. "We need to get through this without triggering alarms. The hangar bay isn't far, but it's heavily guarded. We need to move fast." Kane glanced around at the team, each member showing the same quiet determination. The adrenaline coursed through his veins, sharpening his senses. This was the moment when they could strike back at the Zalvok and prove that humanity wasn't going to go down quietly. They crouched low, moving swiftly and silently. The footsteps of the patrol grew louder, echoing through the hall. Kane's heart raced, his breath shallow, but he kept his movements controlled. Reeve moved like a shadow, slipping ahead and getting into position to flank the guards. Ellison was next to him, her eyes locked on the corner where the Zalvok patrol would soon appear. Kane waited, his rifle at the ready, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill of the air. As the first Zalvok soldier came into view, Reeve pounced, slamming the soldier into the wall with a sickening crunch. Ellison followed immediately, grabbing the soldier's throat and twisting, the sound of breaking bones almost drowned out by the thud of his body hitting the floor. Kane had no time to process the kill. He scanned the hall for more threats, watching for the next patrol. But as soon as the second guard appeared, Kane fired, the pulse shot hitting the alien square in the chest. It fell without a sound. In the blink of an eye, the patrol was neutralized, and the group moved again, faster now. No time for hesitation. No time for second-guessing. "We're almost there," Ellison whispered, as the team rounded another corner and came into view of a larger, more open section of the ship. The layout matched the map they had seen earlier. The hangar bay was just ahead, but it was heavily guarded. There was no way they could approach without being noticed unless they found a way to divert attention. Kane's mind raced, thinking of possible distractions. "We'll need to cause a scene. Draw attention away from the hangar." Ellison's eyes flickered with understanding. "Reeve, you and Kane take the left. I'll get the right. We'll trigger the alarms." Kane nodded, already moving into position. He could hear the faint hum of the hangar's mechanical systems ahead. Huge doors that were thick and nearly impenetrable to small arms fire. But they didn't need to break through those doors. They just needed to get inside and take one of the smaller ships, something fast, something they could use to escape. Reeve was already at the far side, crouched and ready to create a diversion. Kane took a deep breath and followed Ellison to the opposite side, the plan forming in his mind. It was now or never. Kane moved with practiced speed, pulling a small device from his belt, an EMP grenade. The weapon would disable the ship's security systems for a brief time, long enough to trigger the alarms and draw all attention to the wrong location. The clock was ticking. With a swift motion, Kane tossed the grenade toward the ship's central control system, just out of view of the guards. The EMP grenade detonated with a soft pop, the ship's lights flickering as alarms blared throughout the section of the ship. Immediately, the Zalvok guards scrambled into action. The chaos was exactly what they needed. Kane motioned to Reeve, signaling that the diversion was in place. The team moved quickly, taking advantage of the disarray to slip past the distracted guards and into the heart of the hangar bay. The final stage of their mission had begun. But as they crossed the threshold, Kane could feel the weight of their gamble. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about striking the blow to the heart of the Zalvok Empire. And he was ready to see it through. Now, there was no turning back. The alarms blared across the ship, their high-pitched wail reverberating through the metallic corridors. Red lights flashed urgently, casting everything in an eerie crimson glow. Chaos erupted as the Zalvok soldiers scrambled to respond to the unexpected breach. The hangar bay doors loomed ahead, towering and ominous, but the team moved with the kind of precision that only desperation could breed. Kane could feel his heart pounding in his chest as they neared the massive open space that was the hangar. Through the flashing lights and the pounding in his ears, he could see the silhouettes of Zalvok warships lined up along the walls, their sleek, menacing forms a reminder of the overwhelming force they were up against. But the moment wasn't about the scale of the enemy's might. It was about the chance to fight back. Kane's mind sharpened as his eyes locked on the smaller shuttle ships docked near the far wall. Those were their ticket out. They didn't need a massive warship to escape. They just needed a ship fast enough to outrun the Zalvok's pursuit. "Move," Ellison's voice rang out, and they broke into a sprint. Kane, Reeve, and Ellison led the charge, the others following close behind. The ship's hangar was vast, but in the chaos of alarms and scrambling guards, it was the perfect opportunity to slip through the cracks unnoticed. They reached the first shuttle, a sleek vessel that looked more like an escape pod than a warship. Ellison moved to the controls, her hands flying over the keypad. Kane kept an eye on the surroundings, scanning for any sign of reinforcements. They didn't have long. Once the Zalvok realized their escape route, they would flood the area with soldiers. Kane's fingers tightened around his rifle, prepared to engage if necessary. Reeve stood at the rear of the team, rifle ready, watching their backs. The others spread out to cover them as Ellison worked furiously to get the shuttle's systems online. 5 seconds, Ellison muttered, her voice steady despite the mounting pressure. "Once we're in, we won't have much time before the whole ship locks down. The shuttle's on autopilot, but I'll have to override the system to avoid detection." Kane nodded, watching her work with a mixture of respect and impatience. The seconds dragged by as if they were hours, the sound of Zalvok soldiers closing in growing louder. 4 seconds, Ellison repeated, her brow furrowed as she accessed the shuttle's controls. Come on. Kane's muscles tensed, the feeling of imminent danger sharpening his focus. This was it. There was no turning back now. If they didn't get off this ship, they were done. The shuttle's engines whined to life, a soft hum that quickly grew louder as it powered up. Ellison's fingers flew over the final key, locking the system in place. "Now," she shouted. The team bolted for the open hatch, diving inside as the shuttle's engines roared to full power. Kane was the last to enter, glancing over his shoulder one final time as he slid inside the shuttle. A hatch slammed shut behind him with a satisfying thud. The ship lurched as the engines surged into life, and the hangar bay doors began to close, massive metal panels grinding together. For a moment, it seemed like they wouldn't make it, but the shuttle surged forward, and with a violent jolt, they shot out into the vast expanse of space. The Zalvok warship's hangar grew smaller behind them as the shuttle broke free of the vessel's gravitational pull. Kane exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. They had made it. They were free. But the feeling of victory was short-lived. A loud crackle echoed through the shuttle's comm system. Ellison's face tightened as she listened to the transmission. "This is Lieutenant Mara Ellison of the Human Liberation Front," she said, her voice cool but urgent. "We've escaped Zalvok's flagship, requesting immediate extraction." A crackling voice answered, distorted but recognizable. "Lieutenant, you've done it. We've been waiting for you. Prepare for rendezvous coordinates. We'll get you out of there." Kane looked at Ellison, who nodded. She turned to the others in the shuttle. "Stay sharp. We're not out of danger yet. They'll be tracking us. Once we're on our way to the extraction point, we can make our next move." Kane couldn't help but feel a rush of hope flood his chest. They had escaped the Zalvok warship, but they were far from safe. He could already feel the tightening of the knot in his stomach as the realization sank in. They weren't out of the fight yet. Ellison sat at the shuttle's controls, her eyes scanning the readouts as she plotted their next course. "We've got a couple of hours before the Zalvok catch up with us," she said. "But we'll have a safe rendezvous with the rest of the fleet. Once we meet up, we can bring the fight to them." Kane's fingers tightened around his rifle once more, his gaze fixed on the viewport as the stars stretched out before them. Then it's time to show them what happens when you underestimate humanity. The shuttle sped into the black void of space, the weight of their mission still pressing on them. Kane's thoughts turned to the fight ahead. The battle for humanity's survival was far from over. It was only just beginning. And this time, they wouldn't be running from the enemy. They would be hunting them down. The shuttle cruised through the vast emptiness of space, its engines humming steadily as the stars outside blinked like distant, unreachable beacons. For a moment, the team sat in a tense, uneasy silence. Kane's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, strategies, plans, and the deep, gnawing desire to strike back. His heart still pounded from the adrenaline of their escape, but it was quickly being replaced by a sober realization. The hard part was far from over. They had evaded the Zalvok flagship, but they still had to fight their way to a secure extraction point, not to mention face the rest of the Zalvok fleet, which would soon be on their tail. Ellison sat at the shuttle's controls, her hand steady as she adjusted their course. Her focus never wavered, and Kane could see the weight of the mission resting squarely on her shoulders. She was the leader, and the lives of everyone on this shuttle were in her hands. "I'm setting course for the extraction point," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of urgency. "It's about 100 clicks from here, but the Zalvok will have picked up our trail by then. We won't have much time once we get there." Reeve, who had been silent for the last few minutes, leaned forward in his seat, his eyes scanning the radar screens. "How long do we have before they detect us?" Ellison's eyes flicked to the sensors before her. "Less than an hour. I'm running silent, trying to keep a low profile, but we can't hide forever. We'll need to move quickly once we get to the rendezvous." Kane's thoughts wandered to the fight ahead. What would their extraction point look like? Were reinforcements waiting there, or were they walking into another trap? He had been part of enough military operations to know that things rarely went as planned. "Once we hit the rendezvous, we need to be ready for anything," Kane said, his voice firm. "If we're met with enemy forces, we fight our way out. If it's an ambush, we need to break out fast and find another way to the fleet. We can't afford to lose our momentum." Ellison nodded in agreement. "We won't. I've already sent the coordinates to the extraction team. They know what to expect, but we need to stay sharp." The rest of the team settled into a quiet readiness, preparing for the unknown. They all knew that this brief period of peace would soon end. Every minute that passed brought them closer to the danger lurking behind them. Kane couldn't help but think of the bigger picture. He had fought in countless battles, but none of them had been this personal. This wasn't just a war for territory or resources. This was survival. This was humanity's last stand. The invasion had taken so much already: the lives of his comrades, the loss of his home, and the destruction of everything he had once known. But it hadn't taken his will to fight. He glanced at the others. The resistance team around him wasn't just a group of soldiers. They were a family bound together by loss and the burning desire for revenge. Every one of them had their own reason to fight, their own personal vendettas against the Zalvok. And despite the odds, despite everything they had already lost, they were still fighting. The shuttle jolted suddenly, pulling Kane out of his thoughts. The console in front of Ellison beeped urgently. "Incoming signals," she muttered, her eyes scanning the readouts. "They've picked up our trail." The reality of their situation hit him like a punch to the gut. The Zalvok were faster, more technologically advanced, and relentless. It would be a matter of minutes before they tracked the shuttle's escape route and launched a counterattack. Kane stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle as he moved toward the back of the shuttle. "Prepare for combat," he said, his voice calm but laced with a quiet intensity. "Ellison, can we outrun them?" "I'm going as fast as the shuttle will go," she replied, her hands a blur over the controls. "But they have faster ships. It won't take long before they catch up." Kane's eyes met hers, and for the first time, he saw the same steel resolve in her that he felt in himself. They had made it this far. Now it was about making sure they didn't give up. "We fight," he said, his voice strong. Ellison nodded, but her lips were tight. "We fight, and we win. We can't afford to lose anyone else." The tension in the shuttle escalated as the ship's sensors began to light up with more incoming signals. Kane could see the faint blip of Zalvok ships closing in on them. Small, nimble vessels designed for quick strikes and high-speed chases. Reeve turned to Kane, a smile tugging at the corner of his scared face. "I guess the easy part's over." Kane's lips twitched, but there was no humor in his smile. "We'll give them a reason to regret it." The shuttle's comms crackled to life again. "Lieutenant Ellison, this is Commander Bryce. We got company." The voice was tense, and the static made it hard to hear, but Kane could make out the unmistakable sound of gunfire and explosions in the background. "We're en route. Hold tight," Ellison replied, her hands a blur on the controls. "We'll be there in 30 minutes, but if we don't make it, take evasive action. Don't wait for us." Kane turned back to the crew, his eyes hard. "This is it. We fight for humanity. We fight for every single person we've lost. We make sure they know who's coming for them." The shuttle shook again, this time harder, as enemy fire pierced the hull. It was a sign that the Zalvok were closing in fast. There was no more running now. There was only the fight ahead. Kane steeled himself. The final push had begun. The shuttle rattled violently as the first barrage of enemy fire slammed into the hull, sending vibrations through every inch of the vessel. Kane gripped the sides of his seat as alarms blared in the background, warning lights flashing red. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, each second dragging them closer to their fate. "Ellison, can we take another hit?" Kane shouted over the din of the alarms. His mind raced, calculating the potential damage. The Zalvok ships were fast, maneuverable, and brutal. Even one well-placed shot could cripple their shuttle. "We'll survive if we keep dodging." Ellison's voice came back cool, though tinged with urgency. She was hunched over the controls, steering the shuttle hard to the left to avoid another laser strike. "But we won't be able to outrun them forever." Kane nodded grimly, his fingers curling around the rifle at his side. "Then we fight," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Reeve and the others were already prepping their weapons, making last-minute checks on their gear. There was no room for mistakes now. They had come this far. They wouldn't fall short now. Kane exchanged a brief glance with Ellison. Despite the dire situation, she had a determined fire in her eyes. She wasn't ready to give up, and neither was he. Outside, the silhouettes of the Zalvok ships grew clearer. They were circling, preparing for a final strike, their sleek forms gliding through space like predators closing in on their prey. Kane could almost feel the weight of the enemy's gaze on them, as if the Zalvok were savoring the moment before the kill. "Reeve," Kane called, turning toward the larger man. "You've got the rear. Don't let them flank us." "I'll take the right." Reeve nodded without a word, already moving into position. The plan was simple: hold the line long enough for the extraction team to reach them. But the clock was ticking. Each passing second brought the enemy closer, and they had no guarantee that help would arrive in time. As the shuttle jolted again, a sharp hiss from the comms drew their attention. "Commander Bryce, we're engaged with multiple enemy ships. Hold your course, but be ready for evasive maneuvers. We've got your back, but it's going to get hot." Kane's stomach tightened. The extraction was supposed to be their salvation, but it sounded like they were facing an uphill battle to get there. He was no stranger to combat, but the sheer scale of the enemy's forces made him realize just how outmatched they truly were. Still, they had no choice but to fight. "Let's give them hell," Kane muttered under his breath, loading a fresh clip into his rifle. The shuttle's viewport shook as another volley of laser fire lit up the darkness outside. Kane heard Reeve's voice crackle through the comms. "They're closing in on us. We can't keep this up much longer." Ellison pushed the throttle to its limit, the shuttle's engines roaring as they shot forward, narrowly dodging another incoming strike. But the Zalvok were relentless. They had no intention of letting them escape. "We need to buy ourselves some time," Ellison said, her voice steady despite the situation. "Kane, Reeve, take them out." Kane didn't hesitate. He motioned to Reeve, who gave him a curt nod. In one swift motion, the two men leaped into action. Kane moved toward the side of the shuttle, firing his rifle through a narrow opening in the hull, targeting the Zalvok fighters closing in on their tail. Each shot was precise, hitting its mark as the alien ships exploded in bursts of blue and orange light. Reeve's massive form loomed behind him, his heavy rifle kicking with each shot. The enemy ships in their immediate path exploded in clouds of fire, but more came, filling the void with their deadly presence. The shuttle shook again, this time more violently. Ellison gritted her teeth, her eyes flicking to the sensors. "We're almost there. Keep fighting. Don't let them breach us." Kane's heart raced as the next wave of Zalvok ships swarmed in. He focused his shots, one after another, feeling the thud of each pulse shot as it connected with the hulls of the approaching ships. It wasn't enough to destroy them all, but he slowed them down, buying the shuttle precious seconds. "We've got incoming from the left," Reeve yelled. Kane swung his rifle, targeting the ships flanking them. The Zalvok were smart. They were trying to box them in. Ellison swerved the shuttle sharply, pulling them into a quick roll to the right. It was a risky move, but she had no other choice. Another explosion rocked the shuttle's exterior, rattling the team inside. The ship's systems flickered, but Ellison pushed forward. "Commander Bryce, where are you?" Kane barked, his voice tight with urgency. "They couldn't take another hit like that. Hold on, we're almost there." Bryce's voice crackled back through the comms, the static betraying the chaos unfolding around them. Kane could see the distance closing. The extraction point wasn't far now, but the enemy was closing in faster than they had anticipated. The Zalvok ships were relentless, and the shuttle systems were beginning to show signs of wear. Ellison's voice was tight with stress as she pushed the throttle to its limit. "We can do this," Kane muttered to himself, his hand steady on the rifle, eyes fixed on the incoming threat. His pulse was steady, focused. There was no turning back. The only way out was through. The extraction team had to be close. He could feel it in his bones. He only hoped they would make it in time.